6 a.m. Monday morning. Hopkins, Minnesota. It was just the start of another ordinary day for Kurt Olson. But that was not necessarily a good thing for him, for Kurt longed for a life completely different than the one he had. Turning off the alarm clock, Kurt reluctantly got out of bed and stumbled off to the bathroom, still half asleep. Wiping the cobwebs from his eyes, Kurt looked at his reflection in the mirror. He was not all that unattractive of a man, at 25 years old. He stood 6 feet tall and weighed 200 pounds, with a well-endowed muscular physique and a handsome face. It was the sort of body that most women would find attractive. Most men would be very happy to have a body like mine, Kurt thought to himself. But Kurt was not one of those men. For several years, Kurt had a deep desire to become a beautiful young woman. He never felt quite right with being a male, for he was never genuinely interested in traditionally masculine activities. Whenever his friends would invite him over to watch football on Sundays or other similar stuff, he feigned an interest just to feel like part of the group. But that group of friends always seemed artificial to him. Generally, Kurt's best friends were female. He always felt more comfortable around women and realized that he had more in common with them. Strangely enough, Kurt never had a committed relationship with a woman, but this never struck him as unusual, because he was quite content with a woman's friendship. Underneath that friendship, however, was that deep desire of his to be a woman. Although Kurt was physically attracted to the opposite sex since his teen years, he found that this attraction was not what it first seemed. He spent countless nights imagining what it would be like to have a sensual woman's body. He wanted to feel the weight of shapely breasts against his own chest, and he wanted to feel the warmth of feminine sexuality between his own legs. But Kurt's fantasy lover was also a woman. In his mind, he was one with this woman and shared every aspect of her femininity. However, recently Kurt had been having these same dreams more often than before, and they were more powerful as well. As Kurt stepped into the shower, his mind flashed to this woman over and over again, wanting to be united with her. He knew it would be a difficult day at work, for no matter how hard he tried, he could not push these thoughts out of his mind. Kurt worked for a prominent financial firm in the heart of downtown Minneapolis. He always found his exact job difficult to describe to everyone, but he knew that the financial security of several important local businesses depended on his economic advice. He hated to call himself a consultant, but that was what most people considered Kurt to be. As he drove down the 394 freeway towards the office, Kurt again found himself thinking about his fantasy woman and wondered what it would be like to be in her shoes, living the same life as Kurt had now but as a woman. Kurt's reverie was suddenly interrupted by the insufferable traffic on the road as a car horn blared behind him. Apparently, he had failed to notice that the traffic was moving again. Within a few minutes, Kurt had arrived at the IDS tower and had parked his car in the nearby parking garage. Entering the building, Kurt stepped into an open elevator heading for the upper floors. Just before the door closed, Kurt heard the rapid clicking of a woman's high heels as an attractive young lady hurried into the elevator. Looking up at the woman, Kurt realized that he knew exactly who she was. She was his secretary and best friend at work, Carissa Needham. She was just about the same age as Kurt, with an angelic face and an absolutely stunning figure. Carissa had crystal blue eyes and flowing brunette hair, and a smile that would make just about anyone melt. Today, she was wearing a dark blue, feminine business suit that accentuated her curves perfectly. The jacket barely contained her magnificent breasts and showed a generous amount of cleavage, and the skirt showed off her flawless legs in all their splendor. As she stood in the elevator, Kurt just stared at her, not in lust, but in envy. How great it would be to be Carissa. Kurt mused to himself. Carissa's sexy perfume filled the air, and Kurt could not help but to wonder how happy she must be as the incredible woman she was. Carissa turned to Kurt and smiled, "Good morning, Mr. Olson," she said brightly. Kurt was quickly brought back to reality by Carissa's voice. "Oh, hello Carissa," Kurt said awkwardly, trying to hide the fact that he had been watching her for almost a minute. "How are you this morning?" "I'm great," she beamed. "How about you? Did you have a nice weekend?" "It was okay," Kurt lied. He certainly wouldn't feel comfortable telling his secretary about the powerful dreams he had been having recently about his fantasy woman, let alone his burning desire to become a woman. As much as he enjoyed her friendship in the office, Kurt wasn't willing to risk it by discussing his problems with Carissa. As the elevator reached its destination floor, Kurt followed Carissa out of the elevator. As Carissa walked away, he admired the hypnotic sway of her ass in the tight skirt she was wearing. Kurt felt an extra wave of desire fill him by watching her move that way. "Carissa, you have no idea how lucky you are," he whispered softly. Before heading into his office, Kurt stopped by the break room to fix himself a cup of coffee. He wanted to make it particularly strong this morning, for after his erotic dreams and his run-in with Carissa, he could barely think of anything other than his fantasy to become a woman. In the back of his mind, Kurt knew that there would be no way to fulfill that fantasy, but the images and desires were just so strong that they were impossible to ignore. Quickly, Kurt poured his coffee and headed for his office before someone else came into the room. Kurt opened the door to his office and promptly dropped his briefcase and jacket on a chair near the entrance. Sitting down at the desk, Kurt noticed that he already had a message on the telephone. Picking up the handset, Kurt found that the message was from his boss, Mr. Linden. "Kurt," the message said, "there's a very important meeting today at 10 a.m. in the conference room that you need to attend. An organic food store chain wants to build some new locations throughout the Twin Cities, and they are looking for the capital to start this project. Since organic foods are very popular now, I think this could be a sound business decision. Please be there." Obediently, Kurt wrote it down on his daily schedule. Fortunately, he wouldn't have to cancel any appointments to make the meeting, as was often the case when Mr. Linden would call a meeting on short notice. His first client of the day was a representative from a local computer agency that was having trouble staying afloat. Looking over his notes from the previous week, Kurt remembered that the agency was hoping for some emergency liquidity to help keep it in business while the economy was slow. He had about a half hour to get ready. Instead of preparing for the 9 a.m. appointment, Kurt merely stared at the confusing mountain of revenue reports and loan forms that sat on his desk. No matter how hard he tried, Kurt couldn't focus on them for any length of time. His mind kept returning to his fantasy woman and his wish to become her. In a fit of frustration, Kurt pushed a stack of papers onto the floor. "God damn it," he said aloud. Kurt lowered his head and began to sob, tears welling up in his eyes. "What's wrong with me?" he said through his sobs. At that moment, Carissa happened to be standing outside of Kurt's office. She was about to put some files into the mailbox on his door when she heard the sounds coming from his office. Putting her ear against the door, she thought she heard Kurt crying. Hesitantly, Carissa knocked on the door. "Mr. Olson, is everything okay?" Kurt looked up from the desk. "Is that you, Carissa?" "Yes, it's me. May I come in?" Kurt took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. "Please come in." Quietly, Carissa cracked open the door and wiggled into the office, looking as radiant as ever. A brief glance at Kurt's face told Carissa that he had indeed been crying. She grabbed a chair and pushed it right up next to Kurt, holding her skirt flat against her thighs and crossing her beautiful legs tightly as she sat down beside him. Gently, she took his hand and asked in a soothing voice, "What's wrong?" "I thought I heard you crying." If it weren't for Carissa's comforting tone, Kurt might have sent her out of the office right then. Deep down, Kurt knew precisely what his problem was. He wanted to be a woman, but he was actually a man. But how could he tell his secretary this? He looked into Carissa's gorgeous eyes and saw that she truly wanted to help him, and he gave her hand a soft squeeze. I don't know where to start," he managed to say. "You can tell me anything you want." "I promise I won't tell," Carissa said softly. Knowing that it was probably better to tell someone about what was going on rather than keep it bottled up inside, Kurt decided to open up to Carissa and tell her everything. "So, Carissa, I always have these dreams about making love to a woman, and in that dream I am also a woman. For as long as I can remember, I've been enchanted by everything feminine, and I've wanted to become a woman so I can be a part of that femininity. And nothing would make me happier than to become a woman. I bet this all sounds weird, but I can't think of any other way to explain it." "Oh my. Kurt, am I the first person to know about this?" Carissa asked. "Yes, ever since I met you, I've trusted you, Carissa. You are such a great friend to me. But now I don't know what to do. I can't pay attention to any of my work today because my desire is so powerful." Carissa smiled and reassured him as only a woman can. "As bizarre as your problem sounds, I think I can help you. Do you want me to help you out?" Kurt sat upright in his chair. "What do you mean?" "Just tell Mr. Linden that you're going home sick," Carissa said with a wink. "We'll go to my place. I'll drive. Believe me, I want to help you. What do I have to lose?" Kurt thought to himself. Picking up the telephone, Kurt called his boss to tell him that he and Carissa had both come down with a nasty stomach flu and needed to take the day off. With the usual amount of stalling, Mr. Linden gave in to his request. "Don't you go doing this again, Kurt and Carissa," he scolded. "We need your contributions and we can't have people going home sick all the time." With a shrug, Kurt and Carissa gathered their personal things and left the office, occasionally snickering about how they had fooled the boss. "I hope I'm not getting into a big mess," Kurt worried to himself as they walked out of the building. But as he looked upon Carissa's perfect female form, he somehow knew that things would eventually work out. Within a half hour, Kurt and Carissa had arrived at Carissa's home in an upscale suburb of Minneapolis. Kurt knew that Carissa was single, but he had no idea that she lived by herself in such a nice neighborhood. She truly was a lucky young woman. Carissa led Kurt inside. As soon as they were inside, Carissa showed Kurt into the living room and asked him to sit down. Once he was seated, Carissa stood about 5 feet directly in front of him, trying to strike a seductive pose. "Tell me, Kurt, do you find me attractive?" she asked unexpectedly. Kurt was taken aback by the directness of her question. But the answer was obvious. "Yes, Carissa. I think you are very beautiful." Carissa blushed. "In what ways am I beautiful?" These were certainly odd questions that she was asking. Kurt wondered what she might be thinking, but he remembered that she had promised to help him. Kurt studied Carissa's beautiful body carefully, trying to decide what exactly it was that made him say that she was beautiful. But, as he looked at her, Kurt suddenly recognized that he would never be able to choose a single thing that made Carissa the incredible goddess that she was. Unable to come up with a definite answer, Kurt stammered, "Carissa, you know you are beautiful. In fact, you are so beautiful that I don't think there's anything that you could do to change that." Trying for her most innocent voice, Carissa finally asked, "Kurt, am I that woman that you see in your dreams at night?" Kurt looked at Carissa again. Was she playing a game with him? Although Carissa was undeniably gorgeous, Kurt was confident that she was not the woman in his dreams. But he didn't give it a whole lot of thought until now. He looked at Carissa's face and felt his desire swirling inside of him again. And, at that moment, Kurt realized the connection between the woman he had been fantasizing about and his secretary. They were the same person. Carissa, I. Kurt finally managed to say. The feelings inside of him were so intense now that he was completely lost in them. The goddess in front of him personified every part of femininity that he could even fathom. His brain was filled with the singular thought of becoming the woman standing in front of him. Carissa walked up to Kurt and sat down next to him on the couch. Kurt could feel her warmth and smell her sexy perfume. Just one last question, Kurt. Would you want to be me if you could? Yes. Kurt replied instantly. But how? Kurt, let me explain, Carissa interrupted. What I didn't tell you. I was not originally born a woman. In fact, I was a man not unlike yourself only 2 years ago. My name was Carl Needham. I had similar dreams to the ones you told me about, and they drove me absolutely crazy with the desire to become a woman. And just like you, I was totally confused about what to do about it. I thought I was just another horny guy. So how did you become a woman? Kurt inquired. Well, that's where it gets complicated. I'm not totally sure how it happened. One night, my dreams were so powerful and my desires so great that I just screamed out, "Turn me into a woman," at the top of my lungs. And then, I started to feel different, almost as though my body were changing. When I got up to look in the mirror, I saw myself transforming into the very woman that I am today. It made me so happy because I finally felt fulfilled. Along with the change in my sex, my whole life changed with it. All of my clothes had become feminine, and reality had shifted so that everyone remembered me as Carissa. I knew everything about being a woman, and didn't picture myself as anything but a woman. I knew that there was no going back, but I didn't care because I had become the beautiful woman I had longed to be. Kurt became excited. Do you think it will work for me if I try the same thing? You might as well try it. But you should be naked first. In seconds, Kurt had stripped out of all his clothes. If Carissa's story was actually true, the only way he would ever be at ease with himself was to throw caution to the winds and try what Carissa had done. If it didn't work, there wouldn't be any ill effects. But if it did, Kurt would have his fantasy fulfilled and would be the woman he had always wanted to be. Carissa led Kurt into a spare bedroom, dropping his clothes on the floor as he entered. As he lay down on the bed, images of Kurt's fantasy woman flooded his mind. Just as before, his whole being ached with the desire to become just like Carissa. More and more vivid the images became as the woman moved closer and closer to him. Kurt's breathing grew deeper as his imagination took him to a place he longed to be. When the woman started touching his flesh, Kurt yelled out, "Turn me into a woman." At first, nothing happened. Carissa frowned with disappointment, wondering what exactly had caused the magic to give her the body she now had. But at that moment, Carissa noticed Kurt's clothes strewn about the floor where he had left them. They were no longer the masculine business suit that he had come in with. The magic was working. Carissa watched with satisfaction as Kurt's clothes became a feminine business suit virtually identical to the one she was already wearing. Sport coat became feminine blazer, slacks became short skirt, dress shoes became high heels, socks became nylons, undershirt became bra, and underwear became panties. Meanwhile, on the bed, Kurt was moaning loudly with pleasure. Through his moans, Carissa could tell that the pitch of his voice had already risen into that of a sexy young woman. Kurt's face shifted as its features became increasingly feminine. His lips became full and seductive. His nose took on an unmistakably feminine shape. His cheeks were prominent. His eyes became more rounded. His eyelashes grew long and curled. His hair cascaded from his scalp. Carissa looked at Kurt's new face, and she saw that he now had the same sexy look that Carissa herself had. She knew that Kurt would be happy. Kurt's formerly 6-foot frame diminished to a more feminine size. All of the extra weight and body hair he had as a man simply vanished into his rapidly feminizing form. Kurt's skin was now soft and supple all over. His shoulders, arms, and hands shrank to match his body. Kurt's stomach became flat and taut. His waist, hips, and ass were formed to give him an unquestionably feminine appearance. His legs lengthened and became exquisitely shapely. Every aspect of Kurt's masculine body was changing to match Carissa's feminine body. Then, Kurt felt his chest expanding. Instinctively, he reached up with his new dainty hands and cupped his growing breasts. He gently massaged them as they quickly assumed a feminine shape, enjoying the feeling of his stiff nipples. Finally, the transformation reached Kurt's crotch. With remarkable swiftness, Kurt's scrotum and testicles receded into his body to become his wholly female reproductive system. Kurt brought a hand down and started caressing his altering genitalia. As he did, he felt a wet slit open between his legs. Eagerly, he inserted a finger into it and moved it slowly up and down his deepening hole. At last, Kurt grabbed his shaft as it shrank in his hands. Soon, it was little more than a small nub of swollen flesh protruding from the top of his vagina. Kurt let out a loud moan, as the nub retracted slightly and nearly tripled in sensitivity, as it instantly became a totally feminine clit. Carissa smiled anew, looking upon Kurt's vulnerable feminine body, a body that was now identical to her own in every way, down to the last chromosome. The transformation complete, the new woman sat up in the bed. "I am a woman," she exclaimed proudly. "You sure are," Carissa confirmed. "My identical twin, to be exact." The new woman reflected for a brief moment, searching for her new name. In a sudden revelation, she said, "My name is Courtney." Courtney also realized that she possessed knowledge of all things feminine. Life was suddenly wonderful for Courtney, for she was finally at peace with her new identity. She was now completely and irreversibly the woman she yearned to be. Carissa smiled. A beautiful name for a beautiful woman. Noticing the clothes on the floor, Courtney bent over to pick them up. As if by second nature, Courtney put on the feminine business suit without any trouble. The panties, bra, and nylons fit perfectly, scantily covering her sexy form with feminine finery. She followed with the skirt, which tightly bound her legs and hung only partly down her thighs. Then she put on the blazer, observing how it pushed her breasts together to create dramatic cleavage. Finally, she slid effortlessly into the high heels, walking in them as though she had worn such shoes her whole life. Courtney made a request of Carissa. "Show me a mirror. I want to see what I look like." Prepared for the request, Carissa guided Courtney to the full-length mirror that was attached inside the closet inside the bedroom. Courtney stared dreamily at her incredible reflection, admiring the way that the feminine business suit brought out every delightful curve of her body. "Oh my," she said breathlessly. She brought a timid hand to her face, just to ensure that the goddess in the mirror did the same. "I'm positively gorgeous." She did a curtsy before the mirror. "Do you like it?" Carissa asked, knowing that Courtney loved herself. Courtney smiled widely. "I was right, it is wonderful to be a woman. I wouldn't give this up for anything. How can I ever thank you for giving me such a wonderful gift?" Reaching for the bedside table, Courtney misted herself with feminine perfume, adding to her already powerful sexuality. "No need to thank me, Courtney. I merely helped you find what you truly wanted." The two women embraced warmly. Like soulmates, they were nearly inseparable. Although the two women had both become the very object of their own deepest desires, they were never really attracted to one another sexually. Rather, their similarities brought them together as friends. They had similar interests, likes, and dislikes. They always did everything together, from dressing up and going out to dinner to taking a 3-week vacation to Hawaii. And there was always a mystical sort of understanding that Courtney and Carissa had. They always seemed to know what the other was thinking. As identical twins, they were just like sisters. A month had passed since Courtney had become a woman. She was fully enjoying her new life as a beautiful young woman, basking in every bit of her newfound femininity. She had moved out of her old apartment in Hopkins and joined Carissa in her house, living together as sisters. The two women continued to work for the same financial firm, but now Courtney found that she liked her job much more than she previously did. Everyone at work treated her as though she had been a beautiful woman her whole life, and she loved all the attention she now received. Even Mr. Linden treated her more respectfully than before. Courtney was happier now than she ever had been before. Sitting in her office, she absently played with the hem of her skirt as she whirled about in her chair. "Life as a woman is truly better," she said to herself with a sexy smile.